Hey guys, welcome back. So I wanted to do a video on how to help you improve at League of Legends, and I wanted to go above and beyond the usual tips and tricks videos and actually go in depth into the psychology behind League, because it is a very complex and nuanced game. So you should be able to apply the things I'm going to tell you to improve your rank. Last season I went from the bottom of Platinum to Diamond in both solo queue and flex. So hopefully what you'll learn will be interesting and valuable. Alright, let's get to it. And also, if you don't play League and you play other esports, I think that almost everything I talk about should be just as applicable to those games as League. So I'm going to break this video down into 3 different sections. There's going to be the social psych part, which is how you interact with and perceive your teammates, which is very important. There's going to be the emotional side of things, which is pretty much how to not tilt. And formally that's a concept called affect regulation. It's like how you're going to manage your emotions. And then we're also going to talk about decision making, which has been a ton of research on chess players and sports psychology, and a lot of that applies in the same way to League. And by the way, I've been dying to make this video forever. So a couple years ago I finished my PhD and I was working for the city of Miami as a research psychologist, and throughout all my studies and work I was always thinking, you know, this concept applies to gaming. Like, I wonder if people know about that. So how to use social psychology to get better at League. Some people think that as long as they're not raging, like full on being a keyboard warrior and telling people to go drink bleach, that they're not going to tilt teammates when they type things. If you type even any like minor criticism or comment or something that's even meant to be constructive, it's just not going to go well. The only things I would type would be something like focus someone in a team fight, or let's do this, or let's switch lanes, or something really productive like that. And here's why. So you might think that, okay, saying some things isn't that bad, but you have to keep some things in mind about personality styles and personality disorders. So about 7% of the population is a narcissist. Now, even if they're not fully disordered on that end of the spectrum, they may still have a narcissistic personality style. So in that sense, it's going to be even more than 7% of people. Now consider this is a younger demographic, and that gaming tends to attract narcissists because narcissists have externalized self-esteem. So if they do good at something, they feel good. And so gaming, I believe, is just rife with them. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, by the way. Narcissism can actually be very adaptive at the kind of like healthier ends of the continuum. But let me tell you what happens if you type something to a narcissist. 0 to 100 rage. Like full on. It's gonna be bad most of the time, and it's not gonna get you to where you wanna go. Because you have to remember, you're not these people's coach. You might think that it feels good to blame them, or to suggest something to do better, but that's not your job if you really want to win at the end of the day. And it also doesn't make much sense to see yourself as better than people in your elo, because unless you're leveling up a Smurf, then everybody in solo queue is objectively about the same skill as you. Okay, for tip number 2, in a similar vein to tip number 1, in addition to not typing to your teammates, one of the best things you can do is in the fountain just type /mute all. It'll silence the enemy team, and you're also not going to get tilted by things your team says. So, in case you don't want to take my word for it, the clip we're watching is from the Tank Man, who's a challenger support player, really strong at enchanters, and you know, he's been, I think he was like top 15 this last season. So this is his YouTube. You can look him up as David Matz or the Tank Man on YouTube. And yeah, his recommendation is to mute all, and I completely agree with it, because most of the time they're just going to say something toxic and tilt you. And as you'll see when we talk about the emotions section of this video, it is actually pretty hard not to tilt or to detilt. So it's better to just kind of prevent it from happening. Most of the time, if the team wants to communicate something with you, they're going to ping it. In terms of perceiving others, I want to talk about an idea called upward social comparison. So when you downward socially compare, you're looking at someone worse than you, and that makes you feel good. When you upward socially compare, that's a little harder. So like for me as a diamond, an upward social comparison would be like looking at challengers, seeing what they do, or even high diamond, because they're still a lot better than me. And it's really important, even though it feels like a little bad to understand like these guys are much better than you, it's really helpful. So one of my main tips is to watch players who are better than you. So I would just recommend, look up the top players, find who plays your role, watch their games on ropey.gg or however you can get to their videos, and learn from them. See what they do differently than you. Their map movements are going to be different. Their mechanics are going to be different. Their team play, team fights, and decision making, all that's going to be very different. So if you can learn from them, learn from people who are better than you and playing the game at a near like perfect level, that's going to help you improve a ton. Okay, so common situation is something bad's happening in the game, like you're losing your lane or their jungler keeps coming and ganking you, and now you start to tilt. In case anybody doesn't know, tilting basically means you're getting frustrated. So what this is called in psychology is like the frustration aggression hypothesis. Basically, your goal is being blocked, you want to win the game or you want to gain rank, and because it's blocked, you're going to get aggressive or you're going to get tilted. So what can you do about that? Alright, so as you can see from the pie chart, people have done a lot of research on happiness as an example of an emotion. And they've estimated that about 50% of it is genetic, and then 10% of it is situational, which is a lot of what we're talking about here, and then 40% of it is controllable. So if you assume that maybe frustration is similar, then you do have some control over how frustrated you get and how tilted you are, but you don't have total control. And that's important to note. So my recommendation is as follows. Instead of trying to force yourself to be untilted, just take a break from ranks. Don't keep playing, go do something else, play ARAMs, play normals with friends. For me, actually, I've noticed if I see funny things, like if I go on Facebook and there's like fail videos or like a funny dog video or something, I notice myself untilting like really fast. So for some reason, humor to me seems to diffuse the frustration. Alright, so another thing that's actually not talked about very often is the opposite. People always talk about tilt, but what about being happy when you're playing a game? And I'm here to tell you, being happy is just as dangerous, and it's really bad. So my recommendation to you is to try to just have a neutral, cool affect. I'll give you an example of what's happened to me when I've been like in a good mood. So you're winning a game, you're stomping them, and then as a support player, I'll tend to go just a little too far. Like I'm not like running deep in their jungle to ward, something like that, but I'll step slightly further past the boundary of the river, and if we haven't gotten that far and I shouldn't really be there, that's something I'll do if I feel like we're stomping them and I'm in a good mood and we probably can't lose. That's the quickest way to throw a game, especially the higher elo you get. That's less true lower elo, but the higher elo, the good players will punish you for everything you do wrong. If you misstep slightly as like an enchanter support when you're warding, the top lane Wukong will one-shot you and you won't even see him because it's warded, he comes through the wall, and then like he ults and you're probably dead.
You murdered her! You killed her children! Say it. Say her name. Say it!
We all know what happens next. I think it's too gory for my channel, but suffice it to say, don't throw like Red Viper. That was an epic throw right there. Which isn't to say that all emotions are a bad thing with League. There has been research on that. So let's say you have decks of cards and people are playing a game. If somebody has damage to the emotional centers of their brain, they're like the last to catch on that one of the decks of cards is bad and doesn't have what you need to win that game. So emotions do and should inform your decisions, but it's always a balancing act. You have to keep them in check, otherwise they can, again, just slightly skew your play. Okay, my next tip regarding emotions is I'm going to tell you to do something that doesn't feel very good, but it's really important. So there's a concept called locus of control. It's basically like how much control over the environment you have. So you can have an external locus of control where you say, most of the stuff that happens isn't my fault. And there's an internal locus of control, which is that I have control over everything and can influence everything. And you have to have, I would say, like a 90% internal locus of control. So one thing I notice with less good players is that they just blame nonstop. They think it's everybody else's fault. It's never their fault. That's the worst mentality you can have. Every game, you did not play perfectly. There are things that you could have done better, and you should try to improve. Even the pros make mistakes, and they'll talk about them very readily. So you have to be very self-critical. And I'm talking about this under emotions because it feels bad, and most people don't want to do it. But if you record your own games and you're self-critical, you're going to get better really fast. And not just with big things, just nitpick every little thing. Like, did you ward at some point when you've seen the jungler elsewhere on the map? Did you miss that CS? Could you have played the team fight slightly better? Could you have held that summoner? Could you have used heal earlier for the movement speed instead of just for the healing? Just like any single thing that you can improve on. If your game wasn't completely perfect, then you need to improve. So yeah, even if you're recognizing that other people are making mistakes, you have to just assume that you have the most control over the game as possible, and that's the most adaptive way to look at it. Just assume you can control everything and win as hard as you can. Sometimes you can't, but it is really kind of true. Like, if you take an outstanding challenger player, even if you put them in Diamond 5, there's a really good chance they're going to carry that game. And if you put them in the lower elos, they're just going to stomp the lane, roam, stomp that lane, stomp team fights. They will carry. So in that sense, having an internal locus of control is actually true. It's like saying, if I was playing this champion at an ideal level, would I be able to carry? And most of the time, the answer is yes. So even though it's challenging, record your games and assume that every loss is your fault, and assume that when you win, there were still things that you could have done better. Alright guys, part 2 should begin playing in a second. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.